Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Solutions for a Happy Life podcast. And it is, let me check, July 2026. Gentlemen, how are you? Cody?
I'm doing fabulous.
Absolutely. Kraig, how are you?
Doing well.
Kraig with a K?
Yeah.
Make sure everyone
Can't
knows
believe it's July already.
It is July. Hey, you know what? The World Cup's been fun. It's coming to an end. Who's, by the time this gets sent out, we'll have a winner. Who's it going to be?
We should. I'm going to go with Spain. They've been looking pretty good.
España.
Yeah.
I mean, we might as well pick Argentina to lose it or win it in the last minute or so.
That's typically what they do. Christopher, who are you going with?
Argentina because of FIFA.
FIFA will figure out how to make sure Messi wins. You can ride off into the sunset. Excuse me. Anyway, well, thanks for joining us. Gentlemen, today, what I thought we could do, and back in April, the podcast was kind of focused on kind of the new world order of longevity and retirement, and it certainly is continuing to kind of extend itself year after year after year. So there's a lot of strategy and planning that is involved, I think, which we certainly do on a daily basis with our clients, but there's a lot of, I think, unknowns that clients aren't really familiar with, things we've got to worry about. Mm-hmm. And we've talked before, this kind of goes way back to the book with Barry I did back in 2014 that talked about these 5 pillars of retirement, specifically healthy aging, which we're going to get to in another podcast later this year, balanced leisure, maintaining social interaction, meaningful work or purpose, and last but not least, your money, right? And a lot of people think money that's the be it end all to be able to retire. It's really not. As you guys know, it's preparing those other 4 things really first. Money's, generally speaking, the easier part, right?
Right.
But we are going to get into the money today, just simply because, and for a lot of reasons, the last couple of weeks we've had repetitive conversations about money and retirement, and the first part that you're going to kind of talk through. And I know that on a daily basis, let alone weekly, monthly, Cody's having conversations with your clients about how do we manage income stream in retirement. So we really want to get into those, as well as talk about kind of the 2 main risks we got to work through. But let's start with kind of understanding what I'll call the spend in retirement. Yeah. And Kraig, you've had this conversation a half a dozen times this week. Why don't you have it one more time?
Why not?
With our clients.
Yeah, so, when you're working, you have your paycheck coming in, it's easy to not pay attention to exactly what your expenses are. You put them on a credit card, bill comes in, you pay the bill. You don't think about really what's in your bank account because it's being replenished, every week, every month. When you retire, that obviously flips. And so what we do with all of our clients is obviously we build out the cash flow projections. And the first kind of step of that as you get closer to retirement is, saying, what are my essential expenses? Your house, obviously you're always going to have some place to live, the mortgage that goes with that, the property taxes, and then you have, just your regular federal income taxes that we have to plan for because those aren't being pulled from your regular paycheck anymore. Any insurances you have, long-term care, which we'll talk about here in a minute, life insurance premiums if you're still paying those. Food, just your basic necessities, what we call your essentials. We want to make sure that we have those segmented because we know that those are going to be with you for the rest of your life. And then after that, once we have those expenses dialed down, we then move to the lifestyle expenses, which would be, your hobbies, going on vacation, playing golf, any memberships you have, going to the gym, spending on grandkids, those type of expenses that, can fluctuate. Maybe they're not set in stone, planning those. And then from adding those 2 together, we can build a better picture of what we think your cash flow expenses are going to be throughout retirement. And so when you first retire, after we have that kind of planned out, when you first retire, we kind of enter this what we call honeymoon phase, which is where, you've been working all these years, you finally have the time to do what you want to do. So obviously, and we talk about this all the time in our meetings, had that conversation a couple times today already, you're going to spend more when you first retire just because you have so much pent-up hobbies, travel that you haven't been able to do or had the time to do while you were working that you're going to want to do. Totally normal. We just have to make sure that we plan for that. That's where the bucket strategies comes into play and other options to make sure that we're planning for those larger expenses in the early years to make sure it doesn't affect your long-term cash flow. because honestly, if we're pulling out more than what the portfolio can handle early years, that's going to mean you're going to have less spending for later years. And so it's just a matter of planning that out, and so that way you're ready for those larger expenses items in your early years.
So essential versus discretionary, always keep an eye on that.
Right.
And minimize the adult beverages and the Amazon app. Got it. That may be a good tip while you're approaching retirement, too, if we're talking about me. So, Cody, there are some unknowns here in this and some things that I don't think we spend the same amount when we're accumulating money preparing for retirement as when we retire, that we really got to keep our eyes on the prize.
Yeah, I think the big one out there is healthcare cost. If you have it leveraged, meaning through life insurance means, that's certainly the right step in the direction. But certainly, as we prepare for income and what's needed down the road, we're always taking, inflation into account. I think the average inflation is around 3.5% when we look at it like a 50-year average. But there are certain areas where that inflation has been greater, and healthcare would be one of them, right? Mm-hmm. So I think in Missouri it's about 6 to 8%. So that adds up a lot quicker than that 3.5%. So kind of give you an idea today, if you're in assisted living, it's about $64,000, $65,000 a year. A care facility is going to be $80,000 to $95,000, like a skilled nursing, and the memory care, I've seen them 120 plus. And that's in this region here in the St. Louis,
when
right?
My dad was in memory care up in Blue Springs, it was 11 large every month.
11 large. There you go. So, I think the Midwest versus a lot of the coast places, that's tempered. You're going to, especially if you're not planning on living here throughout there, you need to account for the fact that other areas, it certainly probably will be more expensive. Right. Mm-hmm. So just keeping that in mind, and like Kraig said earlier, the money you spend in those early years really has the compound effect in the later years in life.
Right. And there is, we plan on, in the early years, we plan on pulling more from the portfolio normally if Social Security is not turned on, if pensions aren't turned on, if income annuities aren't turned on. Right. It's just you got to plan for it. Mm-hmm. And it really starts with understanding essential versus discretionary expenses. Easy for me to say, discretionary expenses, and where the wild cards are. Right.
Correct.
One of which is a very simple one. Some people will retire. They may have COBRA from their company health insurance, and then they got to bridge the gap before they're eligible for Medicare. And that's an inflated expense for those first handful of years.
Definitely is.
So really understanding essential versus discretionary. See, I said it. Okay, so now let's move on to kind of the second part is, all right, we have the expenses identified, essential versus discretionary. Now how are we going to pay for those? And Cody, I know over the years there's a strategy we utilize and prefer with our clients in terms of how to match those income sources with the sources of expense. So maybe you could walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so kind of itemizing out what are my essential living expenses kind of in a category. And ideally you want to match that with, basically think of those as your guaranteed expenses. Mm-hmm. And then in the ideal world, you want to have some guaranteed income flows to help offset those. Right. And that way your play money is the thing you can afford and continue to do. So what are your guaranteed income flows in retirement? Well, for most of everybody, it's going to be their Social Security. And although it's not a lot, but luckily that does have some sort of COLA on it. Right. I think that averages like 2.5% per year. Mm-hmm. So if you kind of think it from there, earlier I said 3.5% is the average inflation. You're already a little bit under on keeping pace with inflation. Mm-hmm. If you're lucky enough, you have a pension. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, most pensions I've seen don't have a cost of living adjustment on them, but there are some out there that do. And then, a lot of people are going to have still a gap to fill. And, there are guaranteed income sources that you can utilize in the private space, annuities with income riders on them. Mm-hmm. And those can certainly help alleviate that stress on the portfolio of taking those withdrawals out.
Right. Absolutely. And I know one of Craig's favorite things, because I know that the annuity world is misunderstood. It's widely criticized, in some cases for good reason, but in a lot of cases for not good reason, because there's kind of a misnomer, particularly, Kraig, when we're talking about using an annuity for income in retirement. People have a misconception on how and why we're using those.
Right. Yeah. To your point, you just pull up social media. You'll see all kinds of posts of, annuities. Why would you ever have one? It's the worst thing ever. There's also the other end of the spectrum where, annuities are the best thing ever. We're obviously not party to any of those opinions. It's really on a client-by-client basis, but there are definitely areas where an annuity makes sense. In particular, to Mark's point, when it comes to guaranteed income sources. So as Cody was talking about, making sure you have those guaranteed income sources to fund your essential expenses by peeling off a small piece of your portfolio and locking in that gap between whatever your Social Security and pension is, locking in the extra income to guarantee those essentials. You can actually let your portfolio be a little bit more aggressive and grow more if you have that secured, because that's locked in for your life. The nice thing about annuities now is where interest rates are at, is that the withdrawal rates you can get on annuities now are even better than they have been really the last decade when interest rates were so low. So again, it's on a client-by-client basis. It's, by no means would we say ever put everything into annuity, but they can be a really powerful tool. And the other thing that they provide is what we always like to talk about, is sleep quotient. So if you have all of your essential expenses covered between annuity, Social Security, and pension, well, you don't need to watch what the stock market's doing day to day, because you're covered. And so it helps you enjoy retirement a little bit more because all of your bases are covered.
Yeah, well said. And that leads right in, I think, to talking about what are the big risks that we're managing in retirement, maybe focusing more on several things than we might have when someone was in the accumulation phase. And to your point, Kraig, if we have all of our essential expenses, or the vast majority of them, covered by guaranteed income sources, whatever that may be, and even if we use a commercially available income annuity to supplement that Cody, then makes it easier to look at one of the main risks in retirement, and that's managing the risk of the portfolio or the overall nest egg.
Yeah, so the accumulation part's the easy part. You let it, you set it and kind of forget it and let it grow. And then it comes down to, the biggest risk of pulling out the portfolio in retirement is if you have down years, and if you have back-to-back down years, right? So that's usually where people can get in big trouble. So having a strategy put in place, and not all accounts will be treated equal. So segmenting out maybe 3 years of income sources you think you need, and not really taking much equity risk with it. Have a backup kind of immediate growth type of an account. And then, because of the longevity risk really everyone runs into, we're planning 30, 40 plus years. The really only way to combat that for a majority of people is you have to have some sort of equity exposure. But being smart about it, and I think having a strategy in place and continually look at it and adjusting it on the fly as you go as well.
Absolutely. And Kraig, Cody kind of alluded to it before, but the other big risk, because as we half joke about, Father Time's undefeated, right? And eventually, things start to break down. The human body is not designed at this point to last 150 years. So there are, when you have chronic health care issues, those can be quite expensive, and there are means to protect our nest egg and our really retirement happiness from the adverse effect of those expenses.
Right, yeah, and so that's where something like either an annuity or a life insurance policy that has some type of long-term care rider can be a very, very powerful tool to have in your back pocket should you need some type of care. Now we have more transitioned away from the traditional long-term care policies where it's kind of like a car insurance where you use it, you lose it. Doesn't mean we can't still use that, but a lot more times now we're looking at something like a life insurance policy with a long-term care death benefit, where if you don't use it, then your family at least gets something for it when you're paying into that. So at least there's some type of benefit at the end. Or now, back to the annuity space with where interest rates are at, there's been a lot of new products that have come online from some of the annuity providers that we use that provide good leverage for a lump sum payment. You still get a good interest rate. I think right now some of them are paying 5%, and then you're basically leveraging that asset. So if you do need it for long-term care, you can get more than what your actual account value is. Again, it's more of a hedge. Should you need that care, you're not pulling the rest of your assets out. You're going into the insurance companies or annuity companies' back pocket to cover those expenses.
Yeah, and I think that's well said. And it's I just want to reiterate because whether it's annuities or some type of long-term care insurance product, they're most certainly not the greatest invention in the history of finance. They're also not the worst thing ever invented in the history of finance. The true answer is somewhere down the middle, and it's very specific to a client situation, what applies, what doesn't apply.
Right.
And there are a whole host of things out there. Some may apply, some may not. Right, case by case, but it's really a question of looking at it to see if it can help a particular client situation.
Exactly.
All right, so let's do some call to actions from this great information. Again, this is our framework, how we operate with every client. Let's understand the expense structure, discretionary versus essential. Let's look at those income sources, and let's manage to the risks. So, Kraig, it's your opportunity to give our clients a takeaway from this podcast. What would you recommend they do?
Yeah, so kind of going back to my original comments on essential versus lifestyle expenses, if you're getting close to retirement or maybe in retirement now, just pull up maybe your last 12 credit card statements or bank statements and, get two different highlighters. And, one color is your essential, one color is your lifestyle. And you can go line by line and highlight which ones you feel are essential versus lifestyle. And it kind of gives you a framework of, where are your essential spendings at, where your lifestyle is at. I know if you use a credit card predominantly, a lot of credit card providers will break that down for you so you don't have to go through the highlighters. But that would be my one suggestion, is just to kind of get a ballpark of those estimates by using those kind of tools.
Yeah, and let me just ask real quick, do you recommend to our clients that they do this once, or this is an ongoing activity once, twice a year in retirement?
Yeah, I'd say don't necessarily have to do it every year, but every couple, 2-3 years, you'll probably see it on your accounts and your bank statements how you're spending. But just kind of doing a check of are we going above target, below target? Checking in every couple of years is something we always suggest. Great,
Cody, what are you going to tell our clients to do?
Yeah, I think it's kind of to what Kraig was talking about is matching up. What I talked about earlier too is the guaranteed income versus those guaranteed expenses that you have, and making sure they are in fact in line with what you think, because they will change over time. And I think the biggest thing, and people are feeling it now just because we actually have had previous high inflation and it's been higher than the past decade, is that gap and how quickly those expenses can continue to basically erode, right? So, your purchasing power will be less down the road. Just making sure you have a good handle on what that's going to look like.
Excellent. Gentlemen, fantastic information. I appreciate it. I hope everyone has a kind of a good sense now, or a refresher on our framework for handling kind of the retirement, the money aspect of retirement in terms of the expenses, the income, the risks. You got any questions, please feel free to call us. Use the text line. Do the old-fashioned way, pick up the phone. We still like talking on the phone. Please share this with any of your friends or family that may be looking at their retirement transition, or just transitioned to retirement, or even in retirement. It's always good to keep your finger on the pulse of these issues that Cody and Kraig talked about today. We look forward to joining you next month. And I guess it's not go Messi. Is it go FIFA? Take care of Messi. We'll talk to you guys later.